A shame-based identity is when we have a fundamental sense that who we are at some kind of absolute level is not good enough or flawed or worthless or something in that direction. And it's an incredibly painful place to be because it becomes a filter through which we experience ourselves and others and the world. So everything we touch, we might make a painting or create some music, and it feels like that isn't good enough. Like it sucks. It's not great. Or that if we're relating to other people, like if they aren't going to want to see us, they aren't going to want to know who we are. They might, if we try and engage with them, they might react negatively. We kind of just assume this. Or if we're trying to engage with life or the world, we assume that it's going to be, really hard to find a job, maybe just because we're experiencing ourselves and the world through this shame identity. And, shame has a very useful function, but it can become toxic. And this is an example of that. And check out my other video, Healthy versus Toxic Shame, to learn more about that. How this shame identity develops. Very briefly, when you're growing up, shame is what helps you to align to the people around you, so you're not, you don't get disconnected from them. So if you poke your sibling in the eye, your mum might tell you off, and you feel a flash of shame that tells you, hey, don't poke your sibling in the eye. What then happens though, if you're told off too strongly, or you don't feel you're all alone when you're feeling that shame, you might not be able to process it, and so it gets kind of stuck. It wants to come up, but you have to push it down, and it lives in your body from that point onwards, kind of looping. And each subsequent event where you get shamed or experience shame and it's a bit too much adds to that loop until you've got this whole big loop of shame you're carrying around with you, and it ceases to be just this momentary emotion that rises and falls and becomes a state that you can stay in for long periods of time, or even eventually just a personality trait. It kind of feels like who you are, and that's that shame identity, when it feels like who you are is fundamentally flawed or wrong in some way. This shame identity has two parts. It has the physiological energy of shame that you hold in the body, and it has this mental component, this label, this identity that's attached to it. I'm worthless, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I'm broken, I'm weak, I'm pathetic, I'm a loser. There will be some specific words which really resonate with you, that you really feel it land when you hear those words, or if you were to contemplate those words. And you can tell you've landed on a shame identity when you feel those words, cut. It's like, I'm weak. It's like you can really feel that. So in this video, I'm going to talk about different signs that we are living from this shame identity, because we need to notice these signs in order to do something about it, because this shame can be healed. But shame likes to hide, so it rarely presents itself overtly and goes, hello, you're feeling ashamed of yourself. It instead is much more unconscious and kind of reflected more in your behaviors. Before we get into these three aspects, it's worth noting that what the shame identity is saying is not ultimately true. That isn't who you are. You didn't come into the world with this shame identity. You had to adopt it as a survival strategy to stay in connection with those around you. So it's not your fault. You haven't done anything wrong, and you're certainly not broken or wrong in some inherent way. Just to clarify that, because I know it feels so real and it's so painful, but it simply isn't. It's a combination of a feeling in the body and a thought in the mind that creates this entire sense of this world of shame that we inhabit. With that, let's get on to these three signs. So the first is a whole category I call shame-based collapse. This is when we have this unconscious shame identity, and it holds us back in various ways to stay safe from situations that might provoke or trigger that shame, which is just too painful to bear. So we preempt that by withdrawing or isolating ourselves in various ways. One way, for example, I'm just going to go through a whole list of examples, is people pleasing. So we hide certain aspects of ourselves that we fear might create conflict, and we create a false mask of niceness, for example, or agreeableness, pretending we're fine with something when really we're not. We tend not to take up space, so that could be physically, that we're just constantly maybe apologizing for existing, essentially. I'm sorry I take up space in this room. I'm sorry that I need food and all these things. Often we might struggle to ask for our needs. It feels really dangerous to express a desire. I need this, I need that, because we've been conditioned through our experiences that expressing our needs is dangerous. Perhaps when we expressed it as a child, we received an angry response from a parent, and that shame came up as a result. To tell you, hey, expressing your needs is dangerous. You're going to lose that connection with your parent, which is so important. So that we try not to take up space. We might be afraid of being visible or exposed or seen by others. So we might not want to, speak publicly or stand in front of people or draw too much attention to ourselves. Because again, there's a fear that people will see something in what we say or do that will then be judged, and then we're going to feel that shame, and that's really, really threatening. Often in relationships, we can be avoidant, afraid of the intimacy and connection, for the same reason that rather than get that intimacy and connection, which part of us really, really wants, there's a sense, well, if that happens, then they're going to see these parts of me that I'm ashamed of. It's going to bring up all that shame, and so nope, that's a no-go. And so you'll find that, you might break off relationships at certain points. And this could be with friendships or romantic relationships. Another one is self-sabotage. So if part of us has some desire or wants to pursue something in the world, if there's another part of us that fears that, shame might be the result, we might fail or make a mistake or something, it'll unconsciously sabotage us to stay safe. Imposter syndrome might be an example of this, where we feel like we don't deserve to be where we are in a particular company or position. It might be something as wacky as you want to start a business, but you send off the wrong papers to the government, so you can't start a limited company, and it was actually because unconsciously you kind of sabotaged yourself, or you turn up late to a job interview because you're afraid at some unconscious level that you might get it and that you won't it's too high above your station, and so you'll feel shame, and so you accidentally sort of turn up late for this interview. Another one is that we repress our desires. Just like with the needs, our desires and wants can feel threatening and unsafe as well. If we were taught that that's, it's not really welcome, and so it feels much safer to dampen down our desires than to try and fulfill them. And the result of this is that we live inauthentically, and we live very small. We have very limited horizons, and our emphasis is much more on not doing and not saying and not being, and just kind of blending more into the background, so that we don't stand out in ways that others might judge and that might bring up shame. And this is a very, very understandable. It's so understandable that we want to stay safe, but it's a very painful way to live our life. And I'm not saying we all need to live big and extravagantly and get rich and whatever, but there's a depth and a richness to an authentic life when we're not holding back and we're just engaging with the people and things and places that we want to. That can go by the wayside in this kind of shame-based collapse place. On the flip side now, those ones may seem more obvious. The flip side, you have sort of pride-based compensations. These are coping mechanisms for the shame that do the opposite. So rather than collapsing back, we sort of lurch forwards, and we try to run away and outrun the shame by becoming this perfect, incredible, amazing person, and putting pressure on ourselves to be better and better and better and better, whatever that might look like for us. So we could cultivate an air of superiority. We might be quite arrogant or aloof, or be obsessed with being right, be quite morally self-righteous. These are ways that we try to lift ourselves above our shame by condemning others. And this is another point. Often there's a lot of condemnation or judgment of other people, which is just a projection of our own shame. Because if you see someone who is crying, for example, and you're judging them for it, it's because if you were crying, you would feel ashamed in their place. And so when you see them crying, it triggers that shame in you, but you have to repress that and instead judge them rather than meet your own shame. And this is how this function works. There's also an element of overachievement, often a kind of a ceaseless striving and a huge amount of pressure placed on yourself. You might see this with like world-class athletes, for example. If you read interviews with world-class athletes, often they're really miserable and sad because all their lives they've just been trying to outrun their shame and put pressure on themselves to be the best. And you can't ever outrun that shame. It doesn't work. And often we end up equating safety with performance. Like if I do well in that exam, then I can relax for a moment. And our self-worth is incredibly conditional. It's if certain people say we're doing a good job, then I can hold my head high. If those people say, oh, you're not doing such a good job, then I'm worthless. Another way this can present is carefully crafting an image, being obsessed with how we appear to the external world. It could be with makeup or with clothes or with our body. I've met some people who, in certain cases, women generally, who are afraid to leave the house without makeup. Why is this? It's a fear of being seen without makeup, which might bring up shame. So it's a shame-based compensation to present yourself perfectly to the world. Or generally men, but not always, might be obsessed with sculpting a perfect physique. That's probably a balance of men and women. I'm not too sure. It doesn't really matter. The point is sculpting that perfect physique is again trying to outrun the shame, because if we had a quote normal body, that would feel not good enough. And that's only because we carry this shame identity. Another one is that we can be hyper independent and struggle to ask for help, because that might be a sign of weakness, which again would be then relayed, would be a shameful thing. So we can sabotage ourselves or become very dysfunctional because we absolutely refuse to ask for help or find it difficult. And lastly, you can notice control issues here. Things like perfectionism or micromanagement are ways to which we need to have control to make sure that the tiniest mistake doesn't slip through the cracks, because that would be shameful. So these are examples of ways that we build this pride-based compensation on top of a deeper shame-based identity. So deep down, we feel not good enough. And on the surface, we present, or we strive endlessly and ceaselessly to present this perfect persona to the world as a way of trying to outrun that shame. But it never works. So we end up having to do it our entire lives. A third sign is called shame splitting. This is when our psyche struggles to hold the sense I'm not good enough and I am the best at the same time. And so it flip-flops between the two. And you end up simultaneously feeling incredibly inferior, but also superior, kind of at the same time, which feels very conflicted and is quite confusing. So an example might be when someone's very, very nice on the outside, but just like seething on the inside. There's this, another one might be a sort of getting into loops or cycles of comparisons. Like, oh, I'm the worst. No, they're the worst. It's them. Oh no, but I'm so bad. They're so bad. Or flipping between the sense of, okay, no, I'm the worst, but then in the next day feeling like you're the best. And again, so on, you're flip-flopping between these two, the shame identity and like the pride identity, which are struggling to be integrated. In this place, you can struggle to know who you are. You feel kind of fake. And you can find your personality being extremely changeable based on who's around you. If it feels like it's going to be socially advantageous, you might get more attention or whatever it is you're looking for, safety, by feeling worthless, or I'm just being full of shame, you might present that side to you. But if it feels like being arrogant, for example, is going to be what's going to get you most safety in a certain situation, you'll flip into that, and this will change just based on who you're with. So you won't know who you really are. It won't feel solid or consistent or stable. So that's a sort of a less known or understood way that shame identities can manifest. So leave me a comment if you identify with some of these or recognize them in yourself. It's then you want to start investigating those behaviors to see if you can discover the shame and the identity and the label that exists underneath that. And then in my next video, I'll go into much more detail on the practicalities of healing shame. How do you, okay, it's like, okay, I know I've got these shame-based identities. What do I do now? How can I heal them so I can be free of them, so you feel much more free to be yourself in the world? And you don't have to look at yourself and others in the world through that filter or that lens of shame, which is a very freeing way to be. So check out the video that comes after this one for that. Peace out. Bye.